Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. My business has become proverbial as a garage startup. I had a degree in biomedical engineering, and after college I worked for a large firm. The job was not rewarding. In my spare time, I became interested in rapid testing kits for various diseases that would allow consumers to test themselves inexpensively at home to understand whether it is worth conducting a more complex follow-up test. Without going into details unrelated to this story, I wanted the tests to not give false negative results if they were used twice with an interval of 2 days. Up to 10% of false positive results would be acceptable if consumers were aware of this fact. While working in my garage, I first developed a test kit for babesiosis, a relatively little-known tick-borne disease. I sold the patent rights to it to the National Testing Laboratory. After that, I started working on other test suites, and by the time of my third test suite, even though I was in debt because of all the capital I borrowed to prove the effectiveness of my kits, I felt confident enough to start acting on my own, and found Resakit Inc. By the time I turned 43, Resakit was making a lot of money. It had more than 250 employees and was wanted by several different biomedical and pharmaceutical companies. It was at that time that I started to get interested in sales. By the time I turned 36, I had divorced my first wife. Katie and I got married a year after graduating from college, and she was with me during the creation of the first test kits. My long hours of work and going into debt to start a business certainly didn't improve my family situation, but it was destroyed by the fact that I was cheating. My deception was the result of the classic attitude to law that I developed when I sold my second patent rights to the test suite. My lover Sophia was young, impressionable, and thought I was a damn handsome man. However, after 3 meetings with her, I pulled my head out of my ass and cut it off. Unfortunately, she didn't take our breakup very well and told Katie about my affairs. When Katie came face to face with me, I didn't lie, even though Sophia didn't have any real evidence. By that time, I was already feeling bad enough not to add to my sins by lying. Confession may have been good for my soul, but it ended my marriage. Fortunately, we didn't have any children. I thought I was feeling as bad as possible until I found out that in 183 days, not that I was counting, before the divorce decision officially took effect, Katie also cheated on me, and not just the 3 times that I had. Although the divorce process did not have a significant negative impact on my business or financial situation, mainly because I was up to my ears in debt, and Katie did not believe that my efforts would eventually succeed. It almost killed me emotionally. I married my second wife, Brenda, when I was 38, at the moment when Resakit began to show great promise. I hired a good lawyer, and Brenda and I signed a prenuptial agreement. I insisted that a mutual ethics clause be included in the marriage contract as an additional incentive, as if I needed it to remain faithful. Love outside of marriage was defined as any contact, and even a French kiss, although ordinary kisses did not fall under this definition. Before I married Brenda, or before we signed the prenup, I was completely honest with Brenda and told her about my past adultery and how much I regretted it. She seemed pleased with the point about moral principles. The prenuptial agreement also stipulated that she would receive nothing from Resakit, be it shares or sales proceeds, regardless of the reason for the divorce, and I would not receive any part of the money she brought into the marriage. She was quite well off. The penalties for violating the morality clause were significant. My problem started when Resakit was in the midst of its best growth, around the time I turned 40. It was necessary to hire an experienced full-time HR employee, so I asked the current part-time employee, who was being transferred to another department which he was happy about, to select a resume and let me interview the top 4. The first interviewee was Gail Preston, a 155 centimeters tall woman in 12 centimeters high heels who weighed about 50 kilograms. If you translate her personality and ability to charm into size, then her height would be 2 meters, and her weight would be 150 kilograms. She had been married for 6 years, was 35 years old, and had an impressive background in education and work. However, I hardly paid attention to these facts. There was something about the way she carried herself, in her posture during the conversation, in the way she pushed her shiny brown hair off her shoulders, and in the way she pursed her lips, that was just charming. By the time she left the interview with a firm and sensual handshake, an hour later I was sweating and had an unpleasant feeling in my crotch. I immediately realized that it would be dangerous to be around this woman, but it would be unfair to her not to take her into account just because she was as sultry as endless tropical vacations. So I decided. That is, I called my 2 vice presidents and said, "Jim and Judy, I decided it would be better to distance myself from the HR director hiring process. Here are 4 resumes of the most qualified candidates. You two make the decision. If a tie break is required, we will ask Ken to choose between the last 2. I thought you were just talking to that little lighter that slipped out of your office half an hour ago," Judy replied with a puzzled look. "Yes, she is one of the top 4. However, based on that interview, I decided that someone else should make the decision, and I appointed you two. So call her and ask her to come to another interview with the other 3, I muttered in response as the unpleasant feeling in my lower abdomen intensified. Judy and Jim shrugged, said, "Okay," and sauntered out of my office. I immediately went to the gym and worked out until I was exhausted. I hope they don't choose her, I muttered to myself at least a dozen times while doing various exercises or watching TV on an elliptical machine. A week later, Judy and Jim came to my office first thing. "We both agree that Gail Preston is by far the best candidate," Judy announced. "She starts work in a week starting on Monday. We're giving her an office across from yours," Jim added. I swallowed hard, put on a fake smile, and replied, "Great." It was as bad as I feared. I had to communicate with Gail, or at least see her every working day when I was in town. Since we had a very friendly environment in our office, we often held parties, picnics, meetings, field meetings, and other events outside of work, where, fortunately, we most often communicated with our spouses. Gail seemed to be happily married to her husband, John, a stockbroker. Brenda never seemed to treat Gail as warmly as she did most of the other management staff, despite the fact that, as far as I could tell, Gail was always friendly at these events. At the holiday party, after Gail had worked there for about 2 years, somehow it turned out that Gail and I danced together, while John and Brenda danced together. When the fast song turned to a slow one and Gail slipped one of her peerless thighs between my legs, disaster struck. I don't think she felt the moisture before we broke away from each other, but she should have felt it. On the way home that evening, Brenda was not herself. After that night, I started thinking that Gail was putting me in a fucking comatose state. I spent too much time awake thinking about her, and when I saw her ass pacing the hallway at work, I almost had another spontaneous ejaculation. It was then that I decided that for the good of my marriage and for my self-esteem, given my promise never to cheat again, I needed to break up with Gail. By the time of my ill-fated dance with Gail, I had several serious inquiries from biomedical and pharmaceutical companies trying to buy Resicate. We had a significant portfolio of valuable patents covering virtually all aspects of our 31 commercial products, and even more promising products were in development. In addition, I had clearly saved more money than I could ever use, and I was impressed by the philanthropic approach of such famous people as Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett, so I wanted to work for the benefit of society, and not for my own personal well-being. I almost convinced myself that the second reason, dedication to philanthropy, was the main reason I wanted to sell. However, in those moments when I thought about Gail while making love to Brenda, I had to admit to myself what the real main reason was. When I invited applicants to sell Resicate, I involved 6 of the most senior members of the management team, including Gail, in the process. Gail expressed concern to me about the current situation, as she seemed to be sure that she was not the most indispensable member of the team, and did not think that she would be able to find an alternative position suitable from a financial point of view. I advised her not to worry, but I tried my best not to stare at her hips as she sat cross-legged in front of my desk and lifted her skirt. In the end, I sold the company to the 3rd of the 8 buyers who offered the highest price. All the offers were so obscenely high that from a financial point of view it made no practical difference to me which one I chose, because I found them suitable, and also because they did not refuse to offer. Jim and Judy had 2 options, employment contracts for a year, and with Gail, for 5 years. I personally swore to these 3 to keep the secret of their contracts. There were tears in Gail's eyes, and despite my hesitation, she rushed to me and hugged me tightly around the neck, kissing me on the cheek with tears in her eyes. Obeying a completely childish reaction, I did not wash her dried tears off my cheek for 2 days. After I left Resicate, which is now a division of Megabucks Pharmaceuticals, Gail kept in touch with me and invited me to lunch several times. I tried to turn all these invitations into events with our spouses, and I usually succeeded, although I got the impression that Gail was sometimes annoyed by my attitude. During these outings, I felt that a gap was forming between Gail and John, and Brenda usually became more restrained over the next few days. Eventually, I started making excuses not to date Gail. I immersed myself in my charity work and really enjoyed life, although my previous hobbies for Gail had not weakened much. I was away from Resicate for almost 2 years and didn't answer Gail's last calls when it was time for the annual end-of-year party. As a separate division of Megabucks, Resicate still held its own community events. Of course, as the previous owner, I was invited. I called the person in charge of the event and asked if Gail and John were coming. I was assured that they would not come, which allowed me to agree. Of course, I wanted Brenda to come to the party with me on Friday night, but she refused, saying that she had a business trip that would make it impossible for her to return before Saturday morning. Brenda continued to work because she enjoyed it. Of course, we didn't need the money. When I got to the hotel where the party was taking place, almost everyone present greeted me with enthusiasm. It seemed that all the employees were grateful to me for selling Megabucks, which was apparently a good employer, and were happy with the $10,000 bonuses I gave each of them when I left. Then, contrary to what I was told, I saw Gail there. When she saw me, she came up with fire in her eyes. "Why have you been avoiding me, Brent Voorhees? I thought you liked me, and of course you took care of me when you left, signing a 5-year employment contract with me," she scolded. I noticed that her words sounded a little slurred. Gail rarely drank more than a glass of wine at a time, but that evening she seemed almost drunk. Well, I've been avoiding you, Gail. I've just been very busy," I stuttered, already starting to sweat. Where's John?" I continued, hoping to change the subject. "He's not here, and don't try to dodge. I know you've been avoiding me, and before the evening is over, I'll find out the reason. Now dance with me," she ordered. Gail and I danced 5 or 6 dances together, including one excruciatingly slow one, before I convinced her that I needed to talk to the division manager and his wife, as well as other employees brought in by Megabucks. Only on the condition that after the party is over, we meet for drinks at the hotel bar and discuss something. Of course," I mumbled. Before talking to the department manager, I called Brenda on her mobile and got to voicemail. I left a message. My hope that Gail wouldn't find me when the party was over turned out to be false. She grabbed my arm and dragged me to the bar in front of the last number of the group. We found a secluded dark table at the back of the bar and ordered drinks. She the Cherry Fool and I the Virgin Mary. Actually, Gail didn't need a drink, because for the first time in all the time I've known her, she was drunk or close to it. However, I wasn't going to ask her to order a soda. I just smiled and got ready for what was going to happen. "So, Brent, let me be blunt. I think you've been avoiding me because you really like me. Admit it. Why do you think that, Gail?" "Because you've always been very nice to me, but at the same time you've been wary. When we dance, you get hard as a rock, and you can't help but stare at my hips, although I can't figure out why. There's nothing special about them," she chided, followed by burps and giggles. "Well, I like you, but I don't think I have anything for you." I started to answer before she shouted, "That's bullshit. Admit it, you have something for me," she snapped, glaring at me. "If you don't confess, I'll sit on your lap," she chuckled. Well, you're beautiful. I think most guys would fall for you," I replied, taking off my tie. The collar really got too tight for me. "No, they wouldn't have sunk in." Listen, Gail," I muttered. This was ignored. "Besides, my ass is too big. I look like a Hottentot and my buttocks stick out so much," she giggled. In fact, in my opinion, she had a perfect round ass. "And why are you staring at my hips like that? They're too big. They were too muscular for me when I was skating and skiing," she continued, then giggled and giggled again just as our drinks arrived. In truth, Gail's hips are world class. Although they are certainly muscular, there is something beautiful about them, not vulgar. After a couple of sips of Cherry Fool, Gail continued, "Besides, it's hard to live with me. I have a high libido, and when I want love, I don't take no for an answer." She began to list all her alleged shortcomings. She snored, was grumpy in the morning, hung panties in the bathroom, etc., etc., etc. I accompanied each statement with a vague each of which was ignored. After a good 45 minutes of her vilifying herself with the obvious purpose of telling me that I should never have feelings for her, and that we should just be friends, in fact, she just intrigued me even more. She was a real person, in addition to being a goddess. As soon as Gail finished her second helping of Cherry Fool, her eyes glazed over. I gently took her hand, looked into her poorly focused eyes, and asked, "Gail, are you all right? You look like you're about to faint." "I'm a little out of my mind," she giggled, still staring with glazed eyes. "Let me call you a taxi," I continued. "I'm staying at the hotel for the night," she replied, reaching into her clutch, and after a long search, including scattering some makeup that I picked up for her, she pulled out a key card and waved it in front of me. "What room are you in? I'll help you upstairs." "Damn, I can't remember. Probably on the 16th floor, maybe on the 17th. I think it's 1705, she murmured. "Let's go to the front desk," I replied, helping her up and pushing her towards the front desk while she clung to me to keep from falling. When we reached the front desk, I handed the receptionist her key card and my driver's license. The girl was wearing a badge that said Madeline. "Madeline, my friend Gail Preston says she's registered at your hotel, but she doesn't remember her room number. Here's her key card. Could you tell me which room she's in?" I suggested. Well, I'm not sure if I should," Madeline started to reply, clearly noticing Gail's intoxication. "Look, the reason I handed you my driver's license is because you're going to write down the information from it to make sure I don't do anything to Mrs. Preston. I'll just put her to bed and leave a note for the maid so she doesn't wake her up. If she is late with the checkout time, I will pay for the overspending," I continued in the most convincing tone. I could see that Madeline was still unsure, so I continued. "Please consult with the manager, Madeline. I don't want to get you into trouble, but Mrs. Preston needs help." Madeline actually went into the back room and returned 2 minutes later with a big smile. "The manager says that everything is fine. I'll make a photocopy of your driver's license, and then I'll check her room number on the key card." After making a photocopy of my license, surprised by Gail's giggle, Madeline passed the key card through the typewriter on her desk, wrote the room number on a piece of paper, and handed it to me. 1825, the note read. At least she got the first and last of the 4 digits right, I chuckled to myself as I led Gail to the elevator. Gail was very talkative, although not much of what she said made sense as I literally carried her to the elevator and from the elevator to her room. When I opened the door to her room, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "Thank you, Brent. I need you to take off my dress and hang it up. If I sleep in it, it will be ruined." I didn't think it was a good idea, but I didn't know how to avoid it. I unzipped her form-fitting dress, and when it fell to the floor, I realized that there was a bra built into it. The only clothes left on her after the dress fell were thongs. Is there such a thing as a mini thong? And shoes with 10-centimeter heels. Plus, her now completely bare thighs were even above world class, if that was even possible, and her ass was as perfect as it looked when she was dressed. I helped Gail sit on the bed, then took off her shoes from her delicate feet, put the shoes in the closet in her room, and hung up the dress. Then I threw her legs on the bed and pulled the blanket over her amazing body. When I laid Gail down and pulled away, she grabbed me by the lapel of my jacket, pulled my head to her, and imprinted a hot kiss on my lips. After releasing me, she said, "Thank you," and turned over on her other side. By the time I turned off the light and left her room, she was as promised in her diatribe at the bar snoring. Brenda arrived at our house around 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. After we exchanged casual kisses and she asked about the party and I asked about her business trip, she said she needed to take a shower. She put her iPhone and purse on the kitchen table and took her suitcase to the laundry room before going upstairs. Sitting in the kitchen over a glass of orange juice, I felt a little guilty, even though I hadn't really done anything wrong, and felt even more embarrassed about my concern for Gail when my cell phone rang. I really thought it was my mobile. I got up and walked over to the counter where Brenda and I had identical iPhones. To be honest, it was pure chance that I saw a message on what turned out to be Brenda's phone. "You're my best girlfriend for love in the world," followed by a devilishly smiling emoji and the caption Bill. Bill Benson was the guy Brenda worked with and who was probably with her on her business trip the last few days. I collapsed into the nearest chair. My head was all messed up, but I calmed down and was mostly sane by the time Brenda returned to the kitchen in a bathrobe and with her hair still wet from the shower. "Why do you look like your dog just died?" "What is it?" she asked half-jokingly when she saw me. I looked at her without smiling and replied, "Because my marriage just ended." She looked surprised. Handing her the iPhone, I said, "Check your last message." She pressed a few buttons and then covered her face with her hand. "How long has your affair with Bill been going on?" I growled. Her expression changed from startled to hard. About 1/10 as much as your affair with Gail Preston, she chuckled. I've never had love with Gail, I snapped back. Maybe not, but you've been having an emotional affair with her since the day you met, Brenda snapped back. How did you come up with this? I asked, and my voice trembled slightly, because I couldn't deny the emotional connection, although I did everything in my power to prevent it from turning into a physical one. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because of the funny look on your face when you're around her. Maybe it was because of the spontaneous ejaculation in your pants when you danced a slow dance with her. How she understood this, I have no idea. You probably shouted her name at night, and even twice when you used me, you bastard, she growled. That last remark surprised me, but I couldn't deny it. Maybe it was. And that gives you the right to make love to Bill Benson for the last 5, 6, how many months? I shouted. I needed a plan of action in case you left me when your emotional connection turned into a physical one, Brenda replied, this time with a sad expression on her face, tears in her eyes. We stared at each other in silence for what seemed like half an hour, but in fact it was only a couple of minutes. Finally, I got up from my chair and said, Why don't you come home early on Monday afternoon so that I can hand you the documents here and not in your office? I'm not going to try to impose a moral clause on you in the marriage contract. I went up to my bedroom, gathered up the clothes and supplies I would need in the next few days, put them in a suitcase and walked out the door. Before I left, Brenda sobbed, Is that all? Without turning around to look at her, I replied, Yes, that's right. Since this is my house, you will have to leave it within the next month, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement, and walked out the door without bothering to close the door behind him. Brenda didn't try to make up, although it wouldn't have led to anything good because I wasn't in the mood to reconcile. She signed the settlement documents a few days after she was handed the divorce papers, because the prenuptial agreement was very clear about what was going to happen, and I did not refer to the moral principles clause, although she knew that I could do it. I stayed at our beach house for the next month until she vacated what used to be our country house. She took very little with her that she had no right to. That Monday evening, when Brenda was served, Gail called me. I decided to take the call. After a brief exchange of hello, she got straight to the point. I'm sorry, Brent, if I was rude to you at the party on Friday. Although this is not an excuse, I got drunk for the first time since college and wanted to say what was on my mind. I understand, Gail. You didn't do anything wrong. I also want to thank you for dragging my drunk ass to my room, but how did I end up in just a thong? You demanded that I take off your dress so that you wouldn't ruin it by falling asleep in it and hang it in the closet. I grinned back. That sounds like me, she grinned back. Did you get a good look at me? Yes, of course, I grinned again. Was it as disgusting as I told you? She replied, chuckling again. Actually, you're Aphrodite, I replied after a long pause and then quickly continued. But let's not talk about it anymore. I agree, I called about something else, Gail said without any levity. What is it? I asked. In the late afternoon, Brenda called me. She scolded me, called me a siren, not a fire brigade. She had no right to bully you. You didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing you can do about being so damn passionate, I replied, also without any levity. Are you really divorcing her? Yes, I'm getting a divorce. I can't stand cheating. My infatuation with you wasn't cheating, but the fact that she was making love to her colleague was cheating. Listen, but I can't talk about it with you or anyone else. I'm going to take a long time out. I wish you all the best, I said, starting to choke. I understand. Good luck, Brent, and who knows? Maybe we'll meet again when circumstances change, she replied with irritation in her voice. Maybe, I replied, pressing the end button on my mobile phone. I was not as calm and collected about my divorce as it seemed to others at first, although I had to admit to myself that my infatuation with Gail could be interpreted as an emotional connection. I sincerely felt that I deserved praise for everything I did to eliminate the possibility that it would escalate into physical intimacy, and I resented Brenda for equating my emotional connection with her own physical. She could have ended our marriage before making love to Bill if Gail had bothered her so much. This situation also made me remember the disgust that still remained deep in me after I found out long after the divorce that my first wife, Katie, had cheated on me, but at the same time played the martyr during our divorce. I needed to do something dramatic to forget both my unfaithful wives. However, my upbringing and philosophy about how to treat women did not allow me to take revenge on Katie and Brenda. However, Bill and Katie's love buddy Winston, whom she later married, is a completely different story. Since I had unlimited financial resources, I knew that I could take revenge on them, for which I would never be held accountable. For the next month, all I did was collaborate with the main charity I founded and assigned 2 teams of private investigators to find out everything they could about Bill and Winston. I also commissioned another organization with a dubious reputation to conduct a study of possible revenge scenarios. After 30 days, I received reports from all 3 organizations. Bill and Winston had one thing in common. They loved their cars. In addition, Bill often rode his favorite chariot out of town, and Winston went to a disadvantaged area of the city about once every 2 weeks. I hired a hacker to find information about their car insurance, and then a few days after finding out the address, I canceled their policies. Then, when the policy cancellation notices were received about a month earlier, when Bill's car was out of town and Winston's car was in a rough part of town, I took 2 wheels off every car in Denver. At the same time, I treated the trunks and interiors of cars with butyric acid, one of the most disgusting smelling substances known to man. However, I'm not done with these 2 jerks yet. The next stage would also affect Katie and Brenda, but by then I had decided that for now I would not cause them physical or financial harm. It would be too bad. I hired some not too noble gentlemen to break into the house that belonged to Katie and Winston, and into Bill's apartment, where Brenda often spent the night, and treated the mattresses in the master bedrooms in such a way that any significant activity on the beds, other than the usual movements in sleep, would activate a noise generator hidden in the ducts in other parts of the house or condominium. Several different noise generators with different sounds were installed in each dwelling, and a computer chip switched between them for various activations of the bed sensors. I hoped that every time these cheating bastards made love in their bedrooms, unpleasant and disturbing sounds would echo in other parts of the home, resulting in their sexual intercourse being interrupted. Since everything was wireless and the sound generators were well hidden, I hoped it would be months before everything could be destroyed. Once my revenge was complete, I went to Aruba to spend a month there, trying my best to forget about my marriages and maybe even my preoccupation with Gail. I had been in Aruba for about 10 days when I entered the lobby of my luxury hotel after kayaking. A cheeky little firecracker that looked like Gail Preston popped up in front of me, blocking the way. "Fortunately, you're easy to find, Brent. I only had to spend about $1,000 to find you," a well-known voice rang out from behind huge sunglasses and a hat. "Gail?" That was my reasonable question. "In the flesh," she smiled. "What are you doing here?" That was my stupid question. "I was looking for you, of course. We need to talk. Where's your room?" Well then, okay, this is one of the penthouses," I muttered. "Amazing," she grinned, grabbing my hand and heading for the elevators. We chatted about the weather, the hotel, and the nature of Aruba until we entered my room. "You need to sit down," Gail barked, pushing me onto one of the many sofas in the penthouse hallway while she remained standing. Taking off her sunglasses and hat, she began to undress. "John filed for divorce about 3 weeks ago," was her opening statement. "Why?" I asked. "He said he was tired of my emotional connection and wanted to leave." "An emotional connection with whom?" I asked, genuinely perplexed. "With you, asshole," she growled. "Who the hell do you think it was with?" Gail stood with her hands on her hips, a grin on her lips. It was difficult for my mind to comprehend the situation. While my head was still spinning and my face was burning, she finally grumbled, "Well, are you going to do something about it, or are you just going to sit here with such a crappy expression on your face?" After pausing for a few more seconds, I jumped off the bed, picked her up in my arms, and imprinted on her lips the most scorching French kiss I have ever given in my life. Breaking away from her, I carried her into the bedroom. She was already tearing both her top and mine while I was carrying her. All the clothes were taken off within 10 seconds after she fell on the mattress. After we both made love several dozen times with a force that I could not have expected from her, she turned me over on my back when I started to pull away. I caressed her, pulling her to me from time to time until her muscles began to throb. I swear her muscles were so strong she could crack walnuts. Gail screamed. I lost consciousness for a few seconds. We both experienced repeated tremors for at least 10 minutes, each punctuated by sighs, gasps, or groans. Finally, I started to lose consciousness and she rolled off me. As we lay side by side, exchanging quick, light kisses, there were smug smiles on our faces. "You didn't disappoint me, kid. It was an amazing love," she chuckled. "You're even better in real life than in my dreams," I laughed. I didn't think it was possible. I'll tell you what, Eros, she continued. Why don't we just have fun for the next 2 weeks? Surf, dance, eat, and of course use ourselves to distraction, and then have a serious conversation. Can you give up megabucks for 2 weeks? I asked. I've already quit. It's not a problem, she chuckled. Did you quit? I asked. Yes, damn it. I think that somewhere there is a handsome, charming, rich guy who would like to support and pamper me more than anything in the world. And guess what? I suggest you apply for this job first, she retorted with a devilish grin. Our conversation after 2 weeks didn't really matter. By that time, we both realized that our infatuation with each other was real, and even if we couldn't make love 3 times a day when we returned to the real world, we were completely compatible. We got married 3 months after Gail's final divorce. Less than 2 months later, she became pregnant with twins. Now we are both loving parents who find time for mind-blowing love with each other at least 5 times a week, and I have never fantasized about anyone but my goddess wife. End.